My name is Sybil. I'm 65 years old, and my own son locked me out of the $1.8 million home I had lived in for 40 years. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just called a lawyer, and now they're the ones begging to talk. It's a little past 9 in the evening here in California as I begin to write this down. The air outside my little cottage is cool and carries the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth, a fragrance that has always meant peace to me. I'm finally in a place of peace again, but the road here was a war. I feel compelled to write it all down, not for revenge, but for the record. For every woman who has ever been made to feel small in her own home, for every person whose love has been used as a weapon against them. I'd love to know where you're reading this from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It makes this big, lonely planet feel a little smaller, knowing we're all connected by stories, sharing them under the same silent, watchful moon. The end of a world doesn't always come with a thunderclap. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, a slow, methodical erasure that you don't fully recognize until you look up and realize the landscape of your life has been irrevocably altered. For me, it began with the silence where music used to be. For 40 years, my mornings had been anchored by the warm, slightly statistic voice of an old transistor radio, a sturdy, cream-colored box my late husband, Henry, had bought me for our 10th anniversary. It sat on the granite countertop, a faithful companion that played Vivaldi and Bach while the coffee maker sputtered and hissed. That radio was the soundtrack to my life. It played through scraped knees and teenage angst, through celebratory dinners for a hard-won promotion at Henry's accounting firm, and through the hushed, somber mornings after his funeral, when its gentle melodies were the only thing that could fill the crushing silence. It was the hum beneath decades of memory, the audible proof of a life well-lived and a love well-remembered. My life after Henry's passing 2 years prior had been quiet, but it was a comfortable, chosen quiet. It was the quiet of a good book on a rainy afternoon, the quiet of a garden at dawn. I wasn't lonely. I had my book club, my weekly lunches with my best friend Margaret, and I had my house. The house was more than a structure. It was my partner in widowhood. A sprawling Spanish-style home with a red tile roof and a heart of gold. It was the place Henry and I had poured our youth, our dreams, and our savings into. Every floorboard held a story. The faint scratch near the hearth was from Owen's first tricycle adventure. The almost invisible water stain on the ceiling in the den was from a forgotten upstairs bath, a domestic disaster that had ended with Henry and me laughing so hard we cried as we mopped up the water. This house was not just an asset to be listed in an inheritance portfolio. It was the living archive of our family. The pencil marks on the pantry doorframe tracking Owen's growth from a toddler to a young man taller than his father were more precious to me than any stock certificate. The house was Henry's greatest gift, and it wrapped its familiar arms around me in my grief. The quiet ended on a Sunday afternoon in early spring. Owen and his wife of 6 months, Haley, sat across from me at the heavy oak dining table. Haley, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that was both dazzling and unnervingly sharp, cradled a mug of herbal tea. She was the picture of modern success, a rising star at a corporate PR firm. "Sybil," she began, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey, "Owen and I have been doing a lot of thinking, with the housing market in the city being just insane, and with us trying so hard to save for a down payment. Well, I just feel so silly for you to be here all by yourself in this enormous house." I felt a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening in my chest. "It's my home, Haley. I'm not lonely here." Owen, my son, my only child, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had that nervous energy he always got when he was about to ask for something he knew was a major imposition. "What Haley is trying to say, Mom, is that we were thinking, wondering, really, if maybe we could move in just for a little while. 6 months, maybe a year at most. We'd pay a fair rent, of course. It would be a huge help for us to save, and we could help you out. You know, with the yard work, heavy lifting. You wouldn't have to be alone." You wouldn't have to be alone. Those were the 4 words that disarmed me. They were a key, turning a lock in a mother's heart. My logical mind was waving a small red flag. My life was ordered, peaceful. This would be a disruption. But the maternal part of me, the part that had sacrificed sleep, sanity, and a significant portion of my own savings to build his college fund, saw my boy asking for help. My entire life had been dedicated to giving him a stable launch pad. This felt like the final, most important extension of that duty. "How would it work with all your furniture?" I asked, a practical question to stall for time. "Oh, we'd put most of it in storage," Haley said instantly, her answer too quick, too prepared. "We would just fit right into your life. You'd hardly even know we were here." That was the second lie. The first was that they were staying for a little while. "Of course," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "This has always been your home, too, Owen." Haley's smile widened, a flash of triumph in her eyes that I chose to ignore. "Oh, Sybil, thank you. This is going to be wonderful. We'll be one big, happy family." They moved in a month later, and the campaign of quiet, systematic erasure began. The radio was the first casualty. I came downstairs one morning anticipating the familiar crackle of the classical station and was met with silence. The cream-colored box was gone. In its place sat a sleek black cylinder. "Morning, Mom. Like the new gadget? It's a smart speaker. You just tell it what to play. So much easier." "I've linked it to my premium music account," Haley added, already dressed in a sharp blazer, typing furiously on her phone. "No more annoying commercials. We just want to make things easier for you, Sybil. Help modernize the place." I stood there, staring at the empty space on the counter. I wanted to explain that the static was part of the memory, that its imperfection was what made it perfect. I wanted to tell them about Henry waltzing me around this very kitchen to a scratchy broadcast of a symphony, but the words wouldn't come. It felt churlish to complain about such a generous, modern gift. So I just nodded and asked the cold black cylinder to play Vivaldi. It complied instantly, the music filling the room with a crisp, digital clarity that felt sterile and soulless. The next front in this silent war was the living room. The centerpiece of that room was a big, overstuffed leather recliner. It was worn in all the right places, a map of comfort created by years of use. Henry and I had bought it together from a real furniture store, not a flat-pack emporium, to celebrate his first big promotion to department head. It was the first truly expensive, truly adult thing we had ever owned. We had sat in it together, with a baby Owen nestled between us, reading him bedtime stories until he fell asleep. After Henry's funeral, that chair had been my throne of grief, the one place I could curl up and feel held. One afternoon, I came home from my weekly book club meeting to find it gone. In its place stood a rigid, low-slung modern chair in a startling shade of mustard yellow. It looked like a piece of abstract sculpture, and about as comfortable. "Where's the recliner?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Haley looked up from her laptop, a breezy smile on her face. "Oh, I had a couple of guys move it down to the garage. It was just so big and brown, it completely dominated the room. It was throwing off the whole minimalist aesthetic I'm trying to create. Don't you think this one is so much more chic? It really opens up the space." My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. I didn't say a word to her. I walked out to the garage. My beautiful, beloved chair was shoved into a dusty corner, a stack of flattened cardboard boxes piled on top of it. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot with anger and sorrow. That night, under the cover of darkness, I went to the living room and rescued a small, silver-framed photograph of Henry and me on our wedding day from the mantelpiece. Haley had been subtly pushing it further and further to the end to make room for a collection of ceramic orbs. I took the photo to my bedroom and placed it on my bedside table. It felt like I was curating a museum of a life that was being decommissioned. This became the pattern. My things, my memories were clutter. Her things, her aesthetic, were upgrades. I tried to talk to Owen. I cornered him one evening while he was taking out the recycling. "Owen, honey," I began gently, "the chair, it meant a lot to your father and me." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept crushing a plastic milk jug with his foot. "Mom, come on, it was an old chair. Haley has a real eye for design. She's on the board for that new gallery downtown. She knows what she's doing. She's increasing the property value." He didn't get it. Or he didn't want to. He was treating my feelings as irrelevant in the face of aesthetics and finance. He was siding with the stranger he had married against the mother who had raised him. Each time he had a rationalization that made my emotional response seem sentimental and foolish. A new, smaller conflict arose over the garden. My rose garden was my pride and joy, a legacy from Henry, who had been a passionate amateur rosarian. Haley began talking about a phase 2 for the backyard. "Sybil, I was thinking," she said one day, pointing out the kitchen window, "that whole area with the roses is lovely, but it's very high maintenance, don't you think? If we paved it over, we could put in a gorgeous outdoor kitchen and a fire pit. It would be amazing for entertaining, great for my work events." A cold dread washed over me. This was a line I could not let her cross. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The roses stay. They were your father-in-law's pride and joy. They are not to be touched." Haley's smile tightened. It was the first time I had given her a direct refusal, and she didn't like it. I saw a flicker of something hard and appraising in her eyes. I was no longer a quaint piece of furniture to be moved around. I was an obstacle. The gaslighting intensified after that. An important bill I knew I had left on the hall table would go missing. Haley would launch a frantic, dramatic search only to find it in a silly place, like the freezer. "Oh, Sybil," she'd sigh with her false voice, thick with false concern. "You really have to be more careful. Maybe I should just handle the mail from now on, just to take one more thing off your plate." Owen would nod in agreement, his face a mask of worried sympathy. They were building a case against my competence, one misplaced item at a time. The moment of terrible clarity, the moment the background noise of my unease swelled into a screaming siren, happened on a Tuesday night. I was walking down the upstairs hall and heard Haley's voice coming from their bedroom. She was on a speaker call, her voice sharp and clear. "I'm telling you, Diane, he's weak," she was saying, and I knew she was talking about my son. "He's got this massive chip on his shoulder about his father. This house, the money, the whole Rollins name, it all feels like his father's, not his. He's desperate to feel like the man of the house, the one in charge. He thinks this is his way of finally stepping out of that shadow." There was a pause. I flattened myself against the cool plaster of the hallway wall, my hand flying to my mouth. "The lawyer said the trust is the cleanest way to do it," Haley continued, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "He called it asset protection. I call it getting what we deserve. Owen's salary is fine, but it's not going to get us this kind of life. We just have to get everything consolidated and signed over before she realizes what's really happening. Once the trust is the legal owner, it's out of her hands completely. The house, the portfolio, everything." Trust. Lawyer. Out of her hands. The words were like ice picks stabbing into my brain. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just redecorating. This was a cold, calculated, legal coup d'etat. They were planning to steal my entire life, my husband's legacy, right out from under me. I backed away from the door, my legs unsteady. I stumbled into my room and sat on the edge of the bed, my body trembling. I stared at the photograph of Henry and me on our wedding day, our faces young and full of hope. "Oh, Henry," I whispered to his smiling image. He had no answers for me. I was completely, terrifyingly on my own. The final act of this domestic tragedy came on a perfect, sun-drenched California Saturday.
It was the kind of day that makes you believe everything will be all right. I was in my garden, kneeling in the rich soil, the scent of roses and earth filling my senses. It was my sanctuary. I saw my young cousin Sarah pull her little hatchback into the driveway. I had always loved Sarah. After her parents' nasty divorce and the ensuing brutal fight over the custody of the kids, I had made a point of being a stable, loving presence in her life. I had helped with her tuition, taken her shopping for prom dresses, been a shoulder to cry on.
I stood up and waved, expecting her to bound over for a hug. Instead, she gave me a tight, fleeting smile, a little twitch of the lips, and scurried inside the house. It was odd. She seemed to be deliberately avoiding my eyes. A few minutes later, she came back out, got into her car, and drove away without so much as a backward glance. A prickle of unease, sharp and cold, went down my spine. I tried to shake it off, losing myself in the rhythm of weeding and pruning for another hour. Finally, I stood up, my knees aching slightly, and walked to the back door, my gardening clogs leaving dusty footprints on the patio. I turned the knob. It didn't budge. It was locked. That's strange, I thought, a flicker of annoyance passing through me. I never lock the back door when I'm in the yard. I walked around to the front of the house, my footsteps crunching on the gravel path Henry and I had laid together one long, hot summer. The heavy oak front door, the one with the wrought iron speakeasy grill, was also locked. Solidly. I pressed the doorbell, hearing its familiar two-note chime echo faintly inside. I waited. No answer. I pressed it again, holding it down longer this time. Silence. Now the annoyance was curdling into a knot of real dread in my stomach. I knocked, my knuckles rapping sharply against the solid wood. "Owen? Haley? It's me." Nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the small metal grill and the door slid open with a metallic squeak. Owen's face appeared in the opening, pale and framed by the dark iron bars like a prisoner in his own home. He looked haggard, his eyes wide with a desperate, hunted expression. He looked everywhere but at me. "Mom," he said, his voice a pathetic whisper that was almost carried away by the afternoon breeze. I think it's best if you go stay with a friend for a while. Go to Margaret's, just until things settle down." The world tilted. The sounds of the birds in the trees, the hum of a distant lawnmower, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. "Settle down?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, devoid of all emotion. "What needs to settle down, Owen? Open this door. Let me into my house." She's feeling very overwhelmed," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a weak, rehearsed rush. "The pressure of her job, this big house, we just need some space. To ourselves. For a bit." And then my eyes, sharp with adrenaline, caught a glint of metal that shouldn't have been there. A brand new, gleaming brass deadbolt right above the old lock set. It was pristine, without a single scratch or speck of dust. It hadn't been there that morning. They hadn't just locked me out. They had changed the locks on my home of 40 years, while I was 60 feet away, tending my husband's roses. 1,000 emotions warred within me. The rage was a white-hot fire. The heartbreak was a physical chasm opening in my chest. The disbelief was a dizzying wave of nausea. I could have screamed until my throat was raw. I could have pounded on that door until my fists were bruised and bloody. I could have collapsed on the welcome mat, the one that said, "There is no place like home," and wept until I had no tears left. I did none of those things. In that singular, crystalline moment, as I stared at the face of the boy I had raised,
now a stranger hiding behind a locked door and a wall of lies. Something inside me shifted. The soft, grieving, accommodating woman that I had been for 2 years died on that porch. And something new, something cold and hard and clear as diamond was born in her place. The grief turned to steel, the love turned to strategy. I did not say another word. I simply looked at my son, my only child. I let him see the full, unvarnished weight of his betrayal in the silent, unforgiving clarity of my gaze. I didn't blink. I held his eyes until he, a grown man, flinched and looked away, unable to bear the sight of what he had become. I turned around, my back ramrod straight. I walked to my car, each step precise and deliberate. I got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway, the crunch of the tires on the gravel the only sound in the suddenly silent world. I did not look in the rearview mirror. As I drove away from the life I had known, the familiar suburban streets blurring past my window like a movie reel of a past that was no longer mine, I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. The time for war had begun. I reached for my phone, my movement steady. I dialed a number I knew by heart. She picked up on the second ring. "Margaret," I said, my voice as calm and cool as a winter morning. "I need your daughter's number, the lawyer. It's time to make a call." The motel room was a sterile beige box on the edge of the highway, a place of transient souls and forgotten stories. It smelled of industrial-strength lemon cleaner and the faint, desperate scent of air freshener trying to mask years of cigarette smoke. I sat on the edge of a bed with a stiff, unforgiving polyester comforter, the kind that feels like it could repel a fire hose, and stared at my own reflection in the dark screen of the wall-mounted television. I saw a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes, usually soft and crinkled at the corners from smiling, were shadowed and hard. There was still dirt caked under her fingernails from my rose garden. In the span of an afternoon, I had become a refugee, an exile from my own life, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fire of cold rage burning in my belly. That first night was sleepless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the gleaming brass of the new deadbolt. I saw the fear and shame in my son's eyes. Sleep was an impossibility, so I planned. The shock, the grief, the heartbreak, those were emotions, and emotions were a luxury I could not afford. They were clouds that obscured the path forward. I pushed them down, compartmentalized them, and let a glacial, chilling calm take their place. I was no longer a mother mourning a betrayal. I was a general surveying a battlefield, and my first order of business was to gather my intelligence and my weapons. The next morning, after a scalding hot shower that failed to wash away the feeling of violation, I drove to the one place that felt like a safe harbor, Margaret's house. My best friend of 45 years opened the door before I had even knocked, her face a mask of worry. She pulled me into a fierce hug, and for a moment I allowed myself to sag against her, the first crack in my armor. "Oh, Sibby, I knew it! I knew that girl was trouble from the day I met her." Inside her warm, slightly cluttered kitchen, over a cup of tea that was strong enough to dissolve steel, I told her everything. Not just the lockout, but the slow, insidious campaign that had preceded it. The radio, the chair, the gaslighting, the overheard phone call. She listened, her expression growing darker with every word.
"This isn't just a family spat, Sybil," she said, her voice grim. "This is calculated. It reminds me of what happened to Martha Jenkins after her divorce. Her ex-husband tried to hide assets, claimed she was an unfit mother to get out of paying support, fought her over custody of the kids. It's a playbook. They try to make you feel crazy and alone so you give up. She patted my hand, her touch firm. You are not alone, and you are not giving up. You're going to call Trina right now. Trina's office was in a sleek, modern building downtown, a world away from the chintz curtains and comfortable clutter of her mother's home. Trina herself was like her office, sharp, minimalist, and exuding an aura of formidable competence. She was dressed in a tailored gray suit that was less a fashion choice and more a statement of intent. She didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She offered me a yellow legal pad and a pen. Start from the beginning, she said, her voice crisp, and don't leave anything out. No detail is too small. For the next hour, I talked. I laid out the entire sordid story, from the day they proposed moving in to the final, chilling conversation through the speakeasy grill. Trina listened without interruption, her pen flying across her own legal pad, her sharp, intelligent eyes occasionally flicking up to meet mine, assessing, analyzing. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Trina capped her pen with a decisive click. Okay, Sybil, she said. First, I want you to take a deep breath. What they have done is horrific. Morally, it's indefensible. Legally, she paused, it's a declaration of war. And they have made the first move. Our response needs to be swift, strategic, and overwhelming. She leaned forward, her expression intense. Here is what they will do next. They will try to paint you as a confused, incompetent, paranoid old woman. They will use every tool at their disposal to make you seem like a danger to yourself. Their goal is to get the court to grant them conservatorship over you and your estate. If that happens, they win. They gain legal control of everything. They can sell the house, liquidate your portfolio, and move you into a facility of their choosing. That is the worst-case scenario. We will not let it happen. The words, a facility of their choosing, sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. This was the true scope of their ambition. Not just my house, but my freedom. So what do we do? I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. Today, right now, we file for an emergency temporary restraining order and an injunction to freeze every single one of your assets, every bank account, every investment, every line of credit. We cut off their access to your money, effective immediately. We stop them from funding their war with your resources. And then we prepare for their counterattack, Trina said, her eyes glinting. They will file the conservatorship petition. They will come at you with everything they have. So we need to build our own case, and it needs to be ironclad. That's where you come in. You are not a passive client in this, Sybil. You are my lead investigator. I want you to go back to your motel room and write down everything. Create a timeline. Every incident, every conversation, every moved piece of furniture, every forgotten bill. Dates, times, what was said, how you felt. No detail is too small. Your memory is our most powerful weapon right now. We are going to prove that you are not only lucid, but you are meticulous, intelligent, and far more competent than the two people trying to defraud you. I left Trina's office feeling like a different woman. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with a sense of purpose. I had a mission. I had an ally. I was no longer just a victim. I was a plaintiff. As Trina predicted, the response to the injunction was swift and brutal. 2 days later, a process server, a grim-looking man in a cheap suit, showed up at my motel room door and handed me a thick envelope. It was their petition for conservatorship. I sat on the edge of the bed and read the sworn declaration signed by my son. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It detailed my increasing cognitive decline, my bouts of paranoia, my inability to manage basic daily tasks. It claimed I was a danger to myself, a woman lost in a fog of dementia who desperately needed her loving son and his caring wife to save her from herself. Reading those lies, knowing Owen had signed his name to them, was a unique form of agony. It was a public, legal disavowal of me,
not just as a mother, but as a person. I allowed myself 10 minutes to feel the full, crushing weight of that betrayal. I cried. Hot, angry, heartbroken tears. Then I wiped my eyes, picked up the legal pad Trina had given me, and started to write. For the next few days, I worked. I filled page after page with my timeline. April 12. Haley replaced Dad's radio with smart speaker. Said it was to make things easier. Felt like a piece of Dad was erased. Owen agreed with her. May 3rd. My recliner moved to garage. Haley called it clutter. Owen said new chair was better for my back. Felt like I was being pushed out of my own living room. May 21. Haley lost the utility bill. Made a big show of finding it in the magazine rack. Said, "Oh, Mom, you're so forgetful," in front of Owen. Felt belittled, like a child. And so it went. Page after page of small humiliations and big aggressions. It was a painful process, but with each entry, my resolve hardened. This was not just a random collection of slights. This was a pattern of deliberate psychological abuse designed to make me doubt my own sanity. The key, I knew, was the computer. Henry's old desktop sitting in the basement of my occupied house. It held the truth. Henry's question echoed in my head. Can you get into that house? I called Mr. Henderson. I met him at the humble coffee shop again, a place where I knew I wouldn't be seen by anyone in Haley's orbit. He was a man of few words, but his loyalty was as solid as an old oak tree. He saw the van, Mrs. Rollins, he said, his gnarled hands wrapped around his coffee cup. The locksmith, the day they locked you out. It felt wrong. Mr. Rollins, he was always fair, always treated me with respect. I explained what I needed. Not just to get into the basement, but to have a lookout, to be warned if they came home unexpectedly. He didn't even hesitate. His loyalty wasn't just to Henry's memory, but to the idea of decency itself. He knew injustice when he saw it. Wednesday night arrived, cloaked in a moonless sky. I dressed in dark clothes, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I felt like a character in a spy movie, sneaking into my own life. I parked my car 3 blocks away and walked through the familiar, tree-lined streets of my neighborhood, now an alien landscape. Mr. Henderson met me at the side gate, a grim silhouette in the shadows. He unlocked the garage side door and then the interior door to the basement, the old-fashioned key making a grating sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the stillness.
"Their car is gone. You should have at least an hour," he whispered, his breath pluming in the cool night air. "I'll be at the end of the street. I'll call your cell if I see them coming." The basement was cool and smelled of damp earth, cedar, and a half-century of stored life. I moved past dusty boxes of Owen's old school projects, past holiday decorations and forgotten furniture, until I reached the corner where Henry's old workstation sat under a dusty sheet. I pulled off the sheet, and there it was. The beige tower, the bulky monitor. I plugged it in and pressed the power button. The machine groaned and whirred, the fan kicking in with a loud hum. It took an eternity to boot up, each minute stretching my nerves taut. What if they came home early? What if a neighbor saw a light and called the police? Finally, the desktop appeared. I took a deep breath and began to work. Henry's patient instructions from years ago guiding my fingers. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I navigated the old, clunky operating system. Control panel, system tools, file recovery. The interface was a relic from another era, but the logic was sound. I initiated a search for all recently deleted files. A list populated the screen, a digital graveyard of discarded information. Most of it was junk, temporary internet files, old Word documents. I scrolled, my heart sinking. Was I wrong? Was it all for nothing? And then I saw it. The name seemed to leap off the screen. Project Roland's Restructure.xlsx. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. I clicked recover.
The progress bar seemed to mock me, crawling across the screen at a glacial pace. Come on, come on. And then it opened. It was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a list. It was a full-blown business plan for the hostile takeover of my life. It had tabs for real estate assets, liquid assets, investment portfolio. It had a detailed timeline with phases. Phase 1, integration and observation. Phase 2, asset consolidation. Phase 3, legal transfer. It had a budget with projected legal fees for setting up the trust and a contingency fund for potential challenges. They had budgeted to fight me with my own money. The creation date on the file was February 14th of the previous year, Valentine's Day, 6 months before they had sat at my dining table and spun their tale of needing a place to stay. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I saved the file to the small USB drive clutched in my sweaty palm. But I wasn't done. A dark, furious energy propelled me forward. I opened the web browser. The login screen for a Haley's email service appeared. Her username was already filled in, and in the password box, a neat row of black dots. She had saved her password on my dead husband's computer. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was stunning. One click. I was in. I went straight to her sent folder, a repository of her deceit, and I found the emails to Sarah. It was an entire conversation, a string of messages that laid bare the mechanics of her manipulation. It started innocently enough. Just need you to be my eyes and ears, Sarah. Pop over and see Sibby now and then. Let me know how she's doing. You know how worried we are. Then it became more pointed. Did she mention talking to Margaret about her finances? It's important we know if she's getting any strange ideas. Then came the bribe. Sarah, I know this is a lot to ask. It's an emotional burden. I want to make sure you're compensated for your time. That $20,000 consulting fee we discussed is firm. Think of it as a belated graduation present for all your help. And finally, the explicit instructions for the conspiracy. It's go time for tomorrow. I need you to come over around noon. Be a witness in case she makes a scene. We need to establish a pattern of her being confused and agitated. Your testimony could be crucial if we have to go to court to get her the help she needs. I sat there in the cold, damp basement, bathed in the glow of the monitor, reading the evidence of my own family's betrayal. It was all there. The premeditation, the conspiracy, the cold, hard financial motive. My phone buzzed. It was Mr. Henderson. A car just turned onto the street. Looks like them. My heart leapt into my throat. I worked frantically, copying the entire email chain, the browser history, which included searches for how to declare a parent incompetent and contesting a will, onto the USB drive. I ejected the drive, shut down the computer, threw the sheet back over it, and crept up the basement stairs. I slipped out the side door into the darkness just as headlights swept across the front of the house. I was gone before they even put their key in the new deadbolt. The next day, in the sterile quiet of Trina's conference room, we plugged the USB drive into her sleek laptop. We watched in silence as the files opened, one by one. I saw her professional composure dissolve, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief, which quickly hardened into a cold, controlled fury that mirrored my own. She looked up from the screen, her eyes blazing. My God, Sibby, this isn't just a smoking gun. This is a confession, a business plan, and a witness list, all in one. They've handed us the rope to hang them with. She picked up her phone and buzzed her assistant. Jessica, she said, her voice sharp and decisive, cancel my afternoon and get the DA's office on the line. I want to speak to someone in the Elder Fraud Division. Immediately. The game had changed. The war was about to go public. The week leading up to the hearing was a blur of intense preparation. It culminated in a day that I will never forget, the deposition. Trina had warned me it would be grueling, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of sitting in a soulless conference room, a long mahogany table separating me from my son, my daughter-in-law, and their smug reptilian lawyer, Mr. Davies. For 6 hours, he grilled me. His questions were a venomous cocktail of condescension and accusation designed to make me seem confused, angry, and unreliable. Mrs. Rollins, you claim you had a specific routine every morning. Is it possible, given your age, that your memory of this routine is more of a nostalgic ideal than a daily reality? Mrs. Rollins, when you misplaced the utility bill, did you feel agitated? Did you perhaps raise your voice at your daughter-in-law? Mrs. Rollins, you state that you felt erased. Isn't that rather a dramatic, even theatrical description for what amounts to a simple home redecoration? Through it all, I held on to Trina's advice. Stay calm. Answer only the question asked. Do not volunteer information. We are not here to win the case today. We are here to not lose it. I looked at Owen, who stared at his hands the entire time. I looked at Haley, who watched me with a look of cold clinical assessment as if I were a bug under a microscope. And I answered each question in a calm, steady voice, my memory, fortified by my written timeline, serving as an unshakable shield. The deposition was their chance to intimidate me, to break me down before we ever saw a judge. They failed. I walked out of that room exhausted, but more resolute than ever. They had seen my composure, but they had no idea about the arsenal of evidence we were about to unleash.
The day of the hearing, the courtroom felt like a theater set for a tragedy. It was paneled in dark, imposing wood that seemed to absorb all the light, creating a heavy, solemn atmosphere. I sat beside Trina, my spine straight, my hands folded in my lap. My armor for the day was a simple navy blue dress of impeccable cut. It was the dress I had worn to Owen's MBA graduation. I wanted him to see it. I wanted to be a living, breathing reminder of the proud, supportive mother he was attempting to slander and disown. Across the aisle, Owen, Haley, and Mr. Davies sat at their table. Haley was a portrait of concerned professionalism in a cream-colored suit, but the frantic, rhythmic tapping of her stiletto against the table leg betrayed her anxiety. Owen was a study in gray. Gray suit, gray face, gray spirit. He looked hollowed out, a man already defeated by his own choices, staring at a fixed point on the wall above the judge's head. Mr. Davies began the proceedings, his voice a rich baritone flowing like warm syrup over the courtroom. He spun his tragic tale of a loving son and devoted daughter-in-law forced to make an agonizing choice for a matriarch who was, sadly, slipping away from them. He spoke of my forgetfulness, my episodes of confusion, my increasing paranoia. He made me sound like a fragile, wilting flower that needed to be pruned and kept in a dark room for its own protection. Then he called his first, and what he believed to be, his star witness. The petitioners call Ms. Sarah Jenkins to the stand. Sarah looked small and terrified under the harsh courtroom lights. She walked to the witness box with the hesitant steps of someone walking to their own execution, her gaze locked on her feet. Under Mr. Davies' gentle, leading questions, she wove her tapestry of lies. She recounted a fabricated story about me leaving the stove on all night. She described a time I'd supposedly gotten lost driving home from the local grocery store. She spoke of my erratic emotional outbursts and how she and Haley would often talk late into the night, wringing their hands with worry over my well-being. It was a well-rehearsed, if shaky, performance. When it was Trina's turn, she approached the stand not like a predator, but like a meticulous surgeon. Her tone was quiet, almost conversational. "Ms. Jenkins," she began, "you've painted a very clear and very concerning picture of Mrs. Rollins's state of mind. You say you were worried about her."
Yes, very, Sarah mumbled, twisting a tissue in her hands. Let's talk about a specific incident. You testified that my client forgot to turn off the stove on the evening of May 10th. Is that correct? Yes, I believe so. That's a very specific memory, Trina noted. It's fortunate, then, that my client has kept a detailed personal journal for the past 2 decades. According to her entry for May 10th, an entry made that same evening, she was at her monthly book club meeting at the home of Margaret Erickson from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. The meeting's discussion was on the novel The Dutch House. Can you explain how she could be at her book club and at the same time be at home leaving the stove on? Sarah froze. Her eyes darted to Mr. Davies, but he could offer no help. I might have the date wrong. Perhaps, Trina said smoothly. Let's move on to your financial relationship with the petitioners. Did you receive or were you promised any monetary compensation for your help with Mrs. Rollins? No, absolutely not, Sarah said, her voice a little too loud. So, when Haley Rollins emailed you on June 3rd discussing a $20,000 consulting fee for your assistance, that was just a figure of speech. The color drained from Sarah's face. She stared at Trina, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I, I don't know what you're talking about. Trina placed a printout of the damning email on the witness stand ledge. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. Sarah stared at the paper as if it were a death warrant. The judge, a stern-looking man with intelligent eyes, leaned forward. Ms. Jenkins, I advise you to answer the question. You are under oath. A choked sob escaped Sarah's lips. Yes, she whispered, the confession a tiny puff of air in the silent courtroom. For what exactly, Ms. Jenkins? For consulting or for perjury? Objection! Davies leapt to his feet. Sustained, the judge said calmly, but the point has been made. Counsel, you may step down, Ms. Jenkins. Sarah practically fled the stand. The first pillar of their case had crumbled into dust. Next, Haley herself took the stand. She was a phenomenal actress. She managed to produce real tears as she described the agony of watching the strong, vibrant woman who had raised her husband decline into a state of confusion. She painted herself as a savior, a financial wizard who had stepped in only to protect my inheritance from my own impulsive decisions. She made the hostile takeover of my life sound like a selfless act of filial piety. When Trina rose to cross-examine, she was holding the printout of the spreadsheet. Ms. Rollins, she began, her voice as sharp and cold as a shard of ice, you testified that all these actions were made recently in direct response to Sabile's deteriorating condition. Is that correct? Yes, dabbing a perfectly dry eye with a tissue. It was the hardest decision we've ever made. Then can you please explain this document to the court? Trina placed the spreadsheet in front of her. This is a detailed, multi-tab plan to take control of all of Sabile Rollins' assets. It is titled Project Rollins Restructure, and according to the file's metadata, it was created on your laptop on February 14th of last year. That was Valentine's Day, 6 months before you moved into Sabile's home. Were you anticipating her deterioration with such remarkable foresight? Haley stared at the paper as if it were radioactive. Her actress's mask shattered, revealing the raw, ugly panic beneath. That's not what it looks like, she stammered. I was just brainstorming, exploring financial models. Financial models for what, Ms. Rollins? A financial model for taking over the entire estate of a woman whose home you hadn't even occupied yet? A woman who, at the time, was managing her own portfolio with a 10% annual return? Haley was speechless. She looked at Owen, a look of pure, unadulterated fury. You were supposed to have destroyed this. But the final, most devastating, and most theatrical blow was yet to come. Trina turned to the judge. Your Honor, the petitioners have built their case on the foundation of lies. We have proven this was a long-planned conspiracy, but they have maintained under oath that Haley Rollins, with her financial acumen, was the sole manager of these illicitly gained accounts. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then she looked directly at me. It was the signal. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. As we had rehearsed, I stood. The judge, his eyes now fixed on me with intense curiosity, gave a slight nod. I walked not with the shuffle of a confused old woman, but with the firm, dignified stride of a homeowner about to reclaim her property. I approached the clerk's station. I did not look at my son.
I handed the clerk the small, silver USB drive. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the tense silence. When my daughter-in-law tried to dispose of my late husband's computer, I kept it. This is the plan she just denied creating. I recovered it myself. The clerk plugged in the drive, and the spreadsheet, in all its cold, calculating detail, filled the large monitor on the courtroom wall. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The clinical, corporate language, asset liquidation phase, phased transfer timeline, beneficiary reassignment protocol was a confession written in the language of greed. Trina let the image sink in for a long moment before she delivered the coup de grace. And, Your Honor, to execute this plan, they needed cash. They started with small withdrawals, testing the waters. They have sworn that Haley handled all financial matters. She nodded to the clerk. The screen changed. It was now playing a video file. The grainy, black-and-white footage of a bank's ATM vestibule. The date and timestamp were clearly visible in the corner. This footage, Trina announced, her voice ringing with triumph, is from the First National Bank branch on Elm Street, taken last month. It shows a cash withdrawal of $5,000 from Sybil's primary savings account, an account that had been illegally absorbed into their so-called family trust. And there he was, on the screen, larger than life. It wasn't Haley. It was Owen, my son. His face, contorted with a strange mixture of greed and anxiety, was clear as day as he furtively shoved a thick stack of $100 bills into his jacket pocket. He wasn't the passive, manipulated husband. He wasn't the reluctant accomplice. He was an active co-conspirator. He was the one who got his hands dirty. The sound that ripped from Haley's throat was a strangled combination of a sob and a curse. It was the sound of a mastermind watching her entire, brilliant plan go up in flames because of the clumsy, traceable actions of her pawn. Owen didn't even look up. He just slumped in his chair as if his spine had dissolved, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with the quiet, pathetic sobs of a boy who had been caught red-handed. The judge, a man who had clearly seen enough, took off his glasses and polished them slowly, his gaze fixed on the broken man at the petitioner's table. When he spoke, his voice was deceptively soft, but it carried the weight of absolute authority and profound disgust. In my 22 years on this bench, I have seen countless sad disputes over money and property. But I have rarely, if ever, witnessed such a calculated, cruel, and predatory abuse of filial trust. This was not a misguided attempt to help a loved one. This was a home invasion from the inside, planned with the cold precision of a corporate takeover. He didn't need to deliberate. The verdict came down like a guillotine.
The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with extreme prejudice. All property transfers, trust formations, and financial transactions executed without Mrs. Rollins's express and informed consent are declared null and void. And this court is referring the entirety of this case, including the considerable evidence of forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and felony elder abuse, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. It was over. I had won, utterly and completely. As a bailiff moved discreetly towards the petitioner's table, Owen finally looked up at me. His face was a ravaged landscape of tears and shame. His mouth opened, forming the word "Mom," a silent, desperate plea for absolution he would never receive. I simply gave him a small, final shake of my head. There was nothing left to say. I stood, smoothed down my dress, and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back at the wreckage of the family I once had. I stepped out of the courthouse doors, into the bright, warm California sunshine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The aftermath of the trial was, for me, a quiet affair. The loud, messy explosion of Owen and Haley's lives happened at a distance, reported to me in calm, professional updates from Trina. They were facing a mountain of legal trouble. The district attorney, armed with the evidence we had provided, had filed multiple felony charges. Their high-priced lawyer, Mr. Davies, had dropped them the moment the judge uttered the words "criminal investigation," citing a conflict of interest, but we knew it was because they could no longer pay him. The court-ordered injunction remained in place while the DA's office sorted through the financial wreckage, leaving them with no access to the money they had stolen and freezing their own personal accounts. Their marriage, a partnership founded on the shaky ground of a shared criminal enterprise, crumbled under the weight of recriminations and fear. I heard through Margaret, who heard it from a friend who lived in their old neighborhood, that the shouting matches were legendary. They were forced to sell Haley's luxury SUV. Owen was fired from his job once the news of the investigation became public. They were facing bankruptcy, social ruin, and the very real possibility of prison time. It was a swift, complete, and meticulously self-inflicted collapse. I received one final, long and lambling email from Owen. It arrived a week after the verdict, a digital howl of self-pity and misplaced blame. He blamed Haley's ambition, which he claimed had blinded him. He blamed the pressure of his career. Most tellingly, he blamed the long shadow cast by his father. "I just wanted something that was finally mine," he wrote, a line so dripping with pathetic entitlement that it almost made me laugh. In thousands of words of justification, he never once managed to type the 5 simple words that might have mattered. "I am sorry for everything." I read the email once, feeling a distant, mournful pity for the lost little boy he would always be in some small, walled-off corner of my heart. Then I moved the message to the trash folder and emptied it. Some doors, once closed, need to be locked, bolted, and boarded up. I never spent another night in my old house. I had Trina arrange for professional movers to pack up my personal belongings, my clothes, my books, my photographs, and of course, my recliner and Henry's radio from the garage. But I couldn't bring myself to walk through those rooms again. The beautiful memories of my life with Henry were still there, of course, but they were now overlaid with the ugly, greasy film of my son's betrayal. It was a beautiful vessel, but the contents had been poisoned. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. So, I sold it. Trina handled the real estate agents with her usual ruthless efficiency. In the hot California market, it was sold in within a week for even more than its initial valuation. Watching the wire transfer confirmation appear in my new secure bank account, an account only I had access to, was a moment of profound, quiet liberation. It wasn't just the numbers on the screen. It was the feeling of absolute freedom. It was the power to write my own next chapter, a chapter where I was the sole author. I didn't want another sprawling mansion. I wanted peace. I took a month for myself. I got in my car and drove up the coast, exploring the small, charming towns that dot the Pacific shoreline. I stayed in quaint inns, ate in local diners and walked for miles on empty beaches. I was rediscovering myself, the woman I was before I was a wife and a mother, the woman who loved the smell of salt air and the cry of gulls. I found it in a small town nestled in a quiet valley, about an hour's drive from the city. It was a charming, sun-drenched cottage by a small, serene lake. It had 2 bedrooms, a wide, welcoming porch that overlooked the water, and a wild, rambling garden that was just waiting for a loving hand. The day I moved in, with my few boxes of truly precious belongings, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the shore, and felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that I hadn't felt in years. This was my home, not because of its value, but because of its peace. But I knew my journey wasn't finished. My victory in court couldn't just be for my own benefit. It had to mean something more. The money from the sale of the house was a significant sum, more than I could ever spend in my lifetime. It was Henry's legacy, the tangible result of his lifetime of hard work, prudence, and love for his family. I couldn't let its final story be one of betrayal and greed. I had to give it a new, better ending. I met with Trina again, but this time not as a client seeking rescue, but as a founder seeking counsel. Together, we drew up the charter for the Rollins House Foundation. It was the most important, most meaningful document I had ever signed. With a substantial portion of the proceeds from the sale of the house, we purchased a beautiful historic property, not my old house, but a new one, in a quiet, respectable neighborhood. We renovated it from top to bottom, not into a sterile facility, but into a warm, inviting, and elegant home. The Rollins house opened its doors 6 months later. It was a transitional home, a safe haven for women over 60 who had been displaced, defrauded, or abused by their own families. It wasn't just a roof over their heads. We had a small, dedicated staff that included a social worker, a financial literacy coach, and, through an ongoing partnership with Trina's firm, access to pro bono legal counseling to help them fight their own battles. We provided a community for women who had been made to feel invisible, a place where their stories were heard, validated, and believed. 1 year to the day after my trial, I was sitting in the sun-filled common room of the Rollins house. The aroma of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls, baked by one of the residents who was a former pastry chef, hung in the air. I was sitting with a new resident, a woman named Eleanor, a retired school teacher whose children had convinced her to sign her house over to them to simplify her estate, only to put her in a cut-rate, state-run nursing home a month later and list her beloved family home for sale. Her hands trembled as she told her story, tears welling in her eyes. I reached across the polished wood table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was thin and papery, but her grip, when she squeezed my hand, was surprisingly strong. I told her, "You're safe now, Eleanor. Here you are not a burden. You are the matriarch, and we are going to help you fight back." I saw a flicker of something in her tired eyes, something that had been extinguished for a long time, a tiny, resilient spark of hope. Later that afternoon, I was in the magnificent garden of the Rollins house, a much larger garden than the one at my little cottage. I was showing Eleanor how to properly prune roses to encourage new growth. My hands, once again, were deep in the rich, dark soil, a feeling of being grounded, of being connected to life itself. I thought about the long, painful road I had traveled. I had once believed that being a good mother, a good wife, meant endless sacrifice, meant absorbing pain to keep the peace. I had learned a hard, vital lesson. True love, especially the love you must have for yourself, requires boundaries as strong as stone walls. It requires the strength to say no more. Forgiveness may be divine, but dignity is a human right, and it is non-negotiable. My fight hadn't been for revenge. It had been for restoration. The restoration of my name, my rights, and my spirit. Looking at the beautiful home behind me, hearing the sounds of conversation and laughter drifting from the open windows, I knew I had built a new legacy, a better one. It wasn't a legacy of property and stocks to be passed down to a single, undeserving heir. It was a living, breathing legacy of strength, community, and second chances. Henry, my practical, kind, and decent Henry, would have been so proud. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in glorious shades of orange and rose, I felt a deep, abiding sense of peace settle over me. I had lost a son, but I had found my purpose. And in doing so, I had helped create a home where countless other women, other mothers and grandmothers and wives could find the strength to reclaim their own. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to relive, but I share it because I believe in the power of our voices, in the strength of our shared experiences. Has anything like this ever touched your life? Have you ever felt that your sacrifices went unseen, or that your trust was profoundly misplaced? Please share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Knowing that we are not alone is the very first step towards reclaiming our power and our peace.